Go love your own enemies. Don't be loving mine. My enemies are the theocratic fascists. I don't love them. I want to destroy them.
You're a child made in the image of God. Oh no, you're not. You're a faggot. And you can't join your church and you can't go to heaven. This is disgraceful. It's inhuman.
I'm reading an article from the Atheism Examiner. It's, well, examiner.com. Stack Roche, I believe, is the author. And we're having problems with pop-ups, so I'm not going to be on this. His name is spelled S-T-A-K-S-R-O-S-C-H. I'll get the hell off of this page so we don't have to deal with the pop-ups. And he is basically responding to an article called 5 Lies Atheists Tell. Today, Christian.net recently published an article titled 5 Lies Atheists Tell. Not to be picky, but grammatically speaking, the article should be either titled 5 Lies Atheists Tell or 5 Lies an Atheist Tells. Grammar aside, there are plenty of other problems with this article that need correcting. Before I go through each lie and refute it, I want to point out a few things. For starters, it should be pointed out that not all atheists actually hold the views and make the claims that the author is presenting. A modifier is needed in this title. Maybe it should have been 5 Lies Many Atheists Tell, or even 5 Lies Most Atheists Tell. Not that the modifiers would make the article any truer, but it would at least be slightly more generous. That brings me to my next point. The word lie is a strong accusation. A lie is a deliberately incorrect statement. In other words, someone knows the truth and is purposely saying the opposite. So when the author of this article claims that atheists are lying, he or she is claiming that atheists aren't actually atheists. The author is claiming that atheists know that there is a God and that we are just lying about it. Personally, I prefer to give people the benefit of the doubt. If someone claims that they believe in God, I might say that I think they have been indoctrinated to believe that, or that they are mistaken, or that their belief is not supported by the facts. But I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that they must be lying and that they really are atheists. That seems childish and silly. Anyway, let's get on with these lies. 1, the biggest one, there is no God. They would have no problem telling a dying child there is no God. Clearly, they have no idea if there is or there isn't. They assume their conclusion is the only right one. Before I read this man's response, I would like to say, isn't the opposite also true? If it's a lie to say there is no God, isn't it also a lie to say that there is a God based on this person's logic? Clearly, they have no idea if there is or isn't. They assume their conclusion is the right one. Isn't this also true for theists who say there is a God? You know, theists who would have no problem telling a dying child that there is a God. Wouldn't that also be a lie based on this same piece of logic? Okay, so his response. For starters, very few atheists would seriously make such a dogmatic statement as this one. Richard Dawkins is considered to be the most famous and most strident atheist, and even he has made it clear that on a scale of 1 to 7, he wouldn't quite be at 7. Atheists are just not that dogmatic. We generally say that we don't believe there is a God. But I don't know many atheists who would state that there is no God with absolute certainty, in the same way that religious believers are so quick to declare with absolute certainty that God exists and it is their God. Of course it's their God. It's not one of those other thousands of gods that have existed. No, it's just coincidentally and oh so conveniently for them, their God. Okay, that was me interjecting. The author is slightly correct when he or she stated that we have no idea if there is or isn't a God. For the record, neither do Christians. In this sense, we are all agnostic. How many times have I said that in my videos? But it is because we have no knowledge and no valid evidence concerning any deities that most atheists lack belief in any deities. In fact, because there is such an obvious lack of evidence and a lack of scientifically verifiable divine intervention, that I can say that I have maybe some idea that God probably doesn't exist. If God did exist, then he would have a lot of explaining to do. And then he has in parentheses, the problem of evil. Lie number 2. They say they have open minds. We know that is not the case. When presented with spiritual issues, they always dismiss it as fictitious, invalid, or unsupported stories. And this isn't a lie? That's news to me. Anyway, his response. Most atheists I have met, in parentheses myself included, do have open minds. We are open to changing our minds. This is why I'm an atheist now, when I was a Christian before. When presented with valid evidence. In fact, many atheists have done just that. Many atheists were born with religious parents and raised in religious households. Many atheists were once religious believers at one point in their lives. Then they began to evaluate the evidence for religious claims, found those claims lacking, and opened their minds to lack of belief. And believe you me, speaking as somebody who went through that process, it isn't easy. Nobody likes to have to realize that they were wrong, especially if they've been wrong for years and years and years, and walk around arrogantly spouting all this out like it's so true, based on absolutely no research whatsoever. That's me. That's what I did. I do have an open mind, finally, but it took a long time. Again, I'm sorry I interjected, but I said at the start that I would. He continues, most atheists would change their minds in a second if presented with some valid evidence for God's existence. All God has to do is come down here in the present and say hello. Instead, we are forced to rely on ridiculous, extremely unreliable and contradictory accounts from a time when people still thought the earth was flat. Now, how open-minded are religious believers? Many religious believers have told me flat out that nothing I say to them could ever convince them that their beliefs are mistaken or false. Oftentimes, religious believers will dogmatically hold to their conclusion in the face of evidence to the contrary. creationism, denial of the Big Bang, and the belief in prayer are just a few examples of this. Lie number 3. Christianity teaches you not to think. Atheists assume that the Bible somehow teaches Christians to not use your brain. This is clearly not the case. The author then goes on to list 3 Bible verses to support his point. The problem here is that the Bible is so contradictory that it is pretty easy for me to pick it up and find 3 verses to support my point that Christianity does teach people not to think. Here we go. Verse number 1. Jesus saith unto him, Thomas, because thou hast seen me, thou hast believed. Blessed are they that have not seen and yet have believed. John 20, verse 29. God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. 1 Corinthians 1:27. That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. 1 Corinthians 2, verse 5. More than that, we can just look at Christians themselves and what they actually preach. In the United States, the most religious states are also the states with the lowest ranking in education, while the vast majority of modern scientists are not Christians and don't believe in a personal deity. Christianity preaches faith over knowledge. I could, of course, go on and on about this because the evidence clearly is against the author. I bet the author isn't open-minded enough to accept it. Lie number 4. Science exists despite religion. Truth. Science exists specifically because of religion. The scientific method comes from studying philosophy, and Newtonian physics comes from studying astronomy. Religion caused people to study both philosophy and astronomy. Ridiculous. This is his response. Science exists because people are curious about the world around them. This has nothing to do with being religious or non-religious. On the other hand, religious explanations often got and continue to get in the way of scientific progress. Sure, we don't stone scientists for heresy anymore, the way we did when Christianity ruled the world. But many Christians continue to stand in the way of scientific progress and education today. It is true that scientists like Newton were religious, but so were most people back in those days, because if you weren't, they murdered you. While there were many religious scientists, that doesn't mean that science exists specifically because of religion. Far from it. In most cases, religion held back science. After all, it wasn't until relatively recently that the Catholic Church finally forgave Galileo. Religious scientists often had to fight both an internal battle and a battle with the religious authorities of their day for every scientific advance and discovery they made. Charles Darwin was a theologian before he observed evolution via natural selection. Lie number 5. They don't care if there is or isn't a God. Deep down inside of everyone's heart, there is a missing element that is always questioning, searching, and longing to find God. They may try to ignore it, but it still remains there. I don't know any atheist who says that they don't care if there is or is not a God. I'm an atheist. I don't believe there is a God. I am reasonably certain that God is imaginary. But if I am wrong, I certainly would like to know. I would change my views in a second if presented with some valid evidence in support of any deity. I am always questioning and searching for knowledge, but I have no longing to find any deity. Far from living a life devoid from meaning, as many Christians imagine atheists to live, I live a pretty meaningful life. I think most atheists do. We have hopes and dreams, just like everyone else. We feel love and compassion for others, not because we expect some divine reward or out of fear of some eternal torture, but because we feel empathy for our fellow human beings. Most atheists wonder about the world around us, and this motivates us to learn about nature, our world, the universe, and everything else. But we don't want some hollow assertions or empty platitudes. We want to really understand these things through the scientific method, which factors out personal bias and error and gives us a testable way of accurately understanding the world around us. I hope this clears up some misconceptions about atheists. If you want to learn more about atheism, I encourage readers to check out the Atheism 101 section. There I try to give more in-depth responses to some of the most frequently asked questions and assertions by religious believers concerning atheism. And that's the end of the article. You know, I have to disagree with the author on one thing. He says he would change his view in a second if presented with some valid evidence in support of any deity. I think it would depend on the deity that the evidence supports, how my view would change. Right now, if somebody came to me and proved that the biblical God really existed, I still wouldn't be on my knees in front of this being. I have my own idea of what is right and wrong, my own code of ethics. And my own code of ethics would not let me stoop that low as to praise and worship a creature that could do what that creature did in the Bible. If somehow I was made to believe that this thing actually lived, I wouldn't be praising it. I wouldn't be groveling on my face before it, asking forgiveness. I would be its enemy. I would oppose it. I would be against it. And if it meant that I would burn forever in hell because of my defiance, at least I would have stuck to my own personal code of ethics. I would have been true to what I feel is right and wrong. Even at the the fact that I'm going to be punished and tortured forever. I would rather be tortured forever than to lower myself to praise and worship a monster, which is what I genuinely believe the biblical God is, a monster. Now, if the evidence presented showed that Zeus existed or some other god that I've never heard of before, I would want to research that God. I would want to find out as much as I could about that God. And then I would decide if that God was worthy of praise and worship or not. In my opinion, those things need to be earned. At least they do from me. Blind praise, blind, oh, you're more powerful, so I'm going to grovel before you. No. Something that is monstrous, that hurts the innocent, that causes death of 25 million, I think is what I read that the biblical God kills in the Bible. 25 million people. I would not worship that. But if it's some other God and, you know, he hasn't butchered countless people and little children and, fetuses too, or commanded young girls who have just watched their families be slaughtered become sex slaves to the ones who slaughtered them, you know, or the God who commanded that the rape victim should have to be married to the rapist. You know, if I read about this God that they find evidence and proof for and it wasn't a monster, then yes, maybe I would change my view in a second. But it would depend on the God. It would depend on whether or not that God, worshiping and praising that God and showing that God support, would compromise my own sense of what morality is and right and wrong. So that's all. That's my response to his response to the article. I'm proud of myself that I didn't interject more than I did. I'm just every other sentence I'm saying something on my own, but I just wanted to try to read as much as I could of this article. So that's it. If you've been watching, thanks. Bye.